based system which gave birth to Unix and which in turn later on gave birth to Linux, all of which were creations by Richard Matthew Stallman. Meanwhile, can you please turn your cameras on? I always think that if the cameras are not turned on, people are not there at the other end. Thank you, Pranchi. When we're talking about Richard Stallman, we always talk about open source and therefore whatever he did in his compiler as far as GNU, Unix, and later on Linux is concerned. But what essentially happened is a strategic movement away from copyright. All of you must have heard about copyright. What is copyright? It's important to understand what copyright is in order to understand why we think in the digital age copyright might be little problematic. All kinds of authorship cannot depend on copyright anymore. Before that, anybody has any clue about what is copyright? Yes, anybody? So can you copyright any kind of public property? Even if some public property exists in creative domain, intellectual domain, can you copyright any kind of a public property?
No, ma'am.
Correct. So you can copyright things which exist in the domain of the private property, which means for any kind of property, it is important to understand the difference between the public and the private. For a private property, if you want to have some kind of an ownership of authorship over a certain kind of writing, then of course any author would like to copyright his or her own work so that nobody else can copy it or reproduce it and use it for monetary benefits elsewhere without the consent, without the explicit consent of the initial author. That is a way of sustaining work and creativity and assigning and attributing them to individual authors. But it can only exist if a certain kind of writing can wholeheartedly be declared to be of a certain person's writing. What happens if we do not know who has written it? For instance, we are now talking about digital collaborative infinite writing. We're talking about writing which exists in collaborative spaces in the internet, such as wiki-based modes of content production. In such cases of content production, who decides whose article it is? And if we cannot decide that this has been written by such and such person, because remember, one, it is written in collaboration, and two, it is often also written anonymously. There is no onus, there is no ownership of the author and his or her name. That makes the whole thing very complicated and also interesting because the idea of the private and public property gets very fuzzed out in between. The line deceases and the line almost ceases to exist. This kind of writing, which we are now talking about, which we commonly refer to as the digital collaborative infinite writing, apparently does not exist to anybody. In that sense, it is some kind of a non-writing. It is some kind of a new writing. So let us also quickly look at how the idea of copyright started to exist, or how the idea of the private property started to exist. So everybody, of course, already understands that historically property did exist in the narrow binaries of the public and the private. And for that, you can, of course, always read up on the history of the birth of private property, or you can read up private property rights. And there are different books on which you can read up in order to understand the ideas of the private property rights. Um, Contrasting to that is the idea of the digital commons. This is one of the keywords which I will introduce for this class, digital commons. And if you want to understand about digital commons, you can refer to this book, which I will now mention over here. If you want to read up on the digital commons, you can read up this book by Leerhoven and Ostrom, 2007. In this book, the joint authors talk specifically about how the digital commons have started understanding the problems that exist in copyright and earlier rights. Why is Devashish smiling? What is funny about Leerhoven and Ostrom? Is there anything which suddenly happened in between?
Pardon, ma'am.
No, no,
Actually,
that's
I
okay.
saw something in front of my room.
I suddenly saw that I'm talking about something very important, such as digital commons. And Devashish actually is giving a very cute smile, but I could not understand why. The commons itself is a very widely debated term and concept, and it could mean anything either starting from public domain to freedom of sharing, to freedom of copying, to commonality, to anti copyright, or copy left for that matter. Has anybody in this class before today heard about copyleft? Copyleft is this legal position which talks against copyright, and it says that copyright. There's this common saying, there's this popular saying which mentions that copyright is not so much about writing as much as it is about rightism. So copyleft tries to take a left-leaning political understanding to notions of authorship. And accordingly, it tries to understand how a certain kind of content production or intellectual property production can be taken out in the common space for universal access to everybody. It does not have to be limited to taking explicit content from separate people upon payment of money or not, but certainly only upon obtaining explicit consent. Copyleft takes it out of that domain. Copyleft tries and makes content universal. Copyleft tries and makes content either in the public domain, or even if it is not in the public domain, even if it is in some kind of a protected domain, it ensures that more number of people can access it, even if there is a level of moderators in it. The idea of access has changed from the idea of copyright hugely in the idea of copyleft. Now there are different other debates which also talk about critiquing copyleft. There are different other debates which say that copyleft is also flawed in its own way, and perhaps it is flawed in exactly the same ways in which copyright is, because essentially what copyleft tries to do is copyleft tries to reverse copyright. Sometimes the problem isn't in a binary. Sometimes the problem isn't about whether copyright is right or not, whether copyleft is right or not. There will be a third space in which authorship will start existing in completely different parameters and paradigms, such as one space in which we would be talking about today. The point, however, is to see what these commons are and what impact it could have on digital infinite collaborative writing. If you want to read up this book, you can read up this book called Multitude. I have written this down for today's class. Multitude, War and Democracy in the Age of Empire. It's a very important book by Hart and Negri, 2004. But I will now also talk about Jean-François Lyotard. Jean-François Lyotard was an eminent philosopher and literary theorist who came up with this book called Différentes Phrases in Dispute. This book has become a very important book in itself in the history of critical theory and in the history of critical understanding. Has anybody heard about Lyotard before? Anybody interested in this class who's interested with doing postmodernism and such theories after Foucault? Anybody heard about Lyotard in this class? Lyotard happens to be a very eminent literary theorist. In talking about differon is a very important phrase which exists in a different category than Richard Stallman. Richard Stallman is a software scientist who talks about freeing software from its closed source codes and making the source code open, therefore open access. And Richard Stallman talks about this whole thing in 1983. Also in 1983, Jean-François Lyotard comes up with this book called Different Phrases in Dispute, but talks about it from a literary theory point of view. What is interesting is to see that around the time of 1983, two different people from two different domains are talking about two extremely different things. But the two things happen to philosophically come and merge together so beautifully that it almost seems like an intentional amalgamation, even though it was not. In talking about different, Lyotard talks about how some disputes cannot be resolved. And some disputes cannot be resolved because they operate within such different language games that there are no grounds of commonality that can be achieved in order to reach a consensus, which is essential for resolving disputes. So let's talk about examples. Lyotard himself gives examples from the point of Holocaust, but here we will not go back as the Holocaust, and let's give more contemporary digital examples. And one of the best examples that can ever arise in trying to understand difference is the idea of piracy. How many of you in this class believe that piracy is stealing? and one should not engage in piracy. Is there anybody in this class who thinks piracy is bad? One should not engage in piracy because piracy is theft. You are stealing content inappropriately. And the real author is not getting paid, is not getting money, and every other thing that comes with a question of piracy. How many of you in this class believe that piracy is an offense? Piracy is threat, is also theft. Nobody? It's already a revolutionary class. People don't think piracy is theft. So for a long time, it was actually believed that piracy is theft. One should buy original content. One should buy books and not download them as PDF from the internet. One should buy real music CDs and DVDs or whatever and not download them or listen to them inappropriately from elsewhere. With all the new web series that are coming, many people think that it's inappropriate to not pay Netflix and to download them from torrents and other pirated sites. And there will also be a generation which will constantly keep on believing in piracy. They will constantly keep on believing that I do not have the money to buy that book, therefore I will download it. I do not have the money to download the entire series of Game of Thrones, so I will download it from some torrent and still see it. Now, this debate, of course, those who are working for HBO or those who are working for Netflix and those who have legally uploaded with the rights of Game of Thrones, they have legally uploaded them in their domain. Do they not understand that piracy also exists? And probably all episodes will still also be freely available in some other torrent sites. The answer is yes, they do understand. All of them are aware. And they will keep on saying, just give me a second. Yeah. But why do they still not take legal steps in stopping piracy? The answer is very simple, that they cannot prove that this is theft. In order to do that, one has to understand what is theft. Anybody from this class? What do you call theft in Assamese? In Bangla we call churi. What is theft in Assamese?
Same, ma'am.
Churi. What is churi? In one of you technically define what is stealing, what is theft. It's an easy question, so just one of you answer. Nobody? Okay, theft is an act in which supposing there is an object, supposing there is this phone. So I have this phone and you don't have it. After an act of stealing or after an act of theft, you have this phone, I don't have the phone anymore. Is it true or not? Meanwhile, when you are stealing, you don't inform it to me. I come to know that the phone is no longer with me after the phone has reached you. But if I'm supposed to be stealing a phone, then the primary philosophy behind stealing is that I have a phone and you do not have this particular object. After the act of stealing, now you have this object and I do not have this object, right or not? After stealing, can I still have the phone? If my phone has got stolen, can I still have the phone with me?
No, ma'am.
Correct. But that is not the case in an act of piracy. In an act of piracy, after you download a content, it does not mean nobody else would be able to access that content. What essentially happens is I have the content and you have the content and the other person also has a content and almost everybody in this class can keep having the same content together. Which is why those who are activists in piracy, they try to argue and say that piracy is not theft, piracy is sharing. And how come they don't get caught? Many of them do not get caught because they are not operating under the objects and objectivities of copyright. They are operating under different legal parameters altogether. On top of that, since like I was talking about Jean-Francois Lyotard and his idea of differon, so supposing there is a legal idea of theft, one cannot argue whether piracy is theft because piracy does not exist within the same language sensibilities and parameters upon which the legal idea of theft originally exists in our society. After an act of theft, if somebody else additionally has what you already anyway have, then that is not within the same linguistic and cultural sensibilities of an idea of theft. Can you understand what I'm saying? Anybody, can you understand? Yes, Devashish, can you understand what I'm saying?
Can you repeat it again, ma'am?
Typically speaking, an act of theft is one in which, supposing I have something with me and you do not have that with you. So you do not inform me and you take it away from me. After you take it away, the new scenario is you have that thing with you now and I do not have that thing with me any longer. That is typically an act of theft. But the case with piracy is not similar. In piracy, if there is some content which has been uploaded in torrent, if Debashish downloads a certain movie from torrent, will that movie go away from forever? So what will happen? Probably Devashish will now have a copy. Probably Archana will also have a copy. Probably Biju Moni will also have a copy. And the place from which the content was taken will still be there. True or not? That being the case, can you legally argue this to be stealing or to be theft in the same way in which theft has been legally theorized and understood for so long? Can you even call it a theft if after stealing, nobody loses anything? Only people additionally gain things. Can you call it stealing anymore? That is my question. More than anything, that's actually a philosophical legal question. What is your answer, Devashish?
When you are saying the previous definition of stealing, then we cannot say it is actually a steal, but the content creator or the owner of that content are not getting enough the necessary value for the creating it, I
Correct.
think.
Correct. So now we see that the problem is not so much about the ethics of stealing as much as it is about the owner or the original writer or whoever is the copyrighted legal holder of the object. It is not so much about the philosophy of stealing as much as it is about the transaction of money. And it is important to understand that these two statuses are different. But that's not how it comes around. Normally, the idea which comes around in an act of piracy is unethical. Piracy is unethical because you are defying people from getting their original amount of money. But in order to get that original amount of money, you are anyway excluding a huge another mass who does not have enough economic access, digital access, technological access to get through the original content. So this debate will remain. There is a plus and a minus at both ends. I'm not asking you to take stands, but I'm asking you to realize that it's not an ethical problem that you are downloading something from pirated sites. It's not a case of stealing, like often people ask you to think about it as much as it is a problem in financial transactions, as much as it is a problem in monopolies not remaining monopolies, cartels not remaining cartels, or even small businesses not remaining small businesses. Now, that is an economic problem, not an ethical problem. And since till before, stealing had both the problems. Till before, stealing had an economic problem and stealing also had an ethical problem. So, the right idea of right definition of stealing would include both. That stealing is an act in which monetarily I am at a loss because my money got stolen. Additionally, it's also an ethical problem because you took away my thing and therefore I do not have the thing anymore. So an economic problem or a deficit problem and an ethical problem used to coexist philosophically in the understanding and idea of stealing. In piracy, half the problem exists, the other half does not exist. And since we cannot talk from the same parameters from which to address a legal problem, is what Lyotard refers to as difference. Difference is a unique case in which you cannot reach immediate legal resolutions. Not because people are fighting and they don't want to reach resolutions, not because of that, but because philosophically sometimes it's impossible to to realize whether this is a crime or not. So, for instance, if I take away your land, would you call me a trespasser? Yes. Would you call me a thief? Yes. But if the government says that we will now take away all this land, and after taking this land, we will now have different other projects built upon it, and maybe we will compensate you with some money or not, then there are two problems. Only one problem is about money. The other problem is if the government wants whether you can refuse it or not. If I want to take away your land and I say I want to give you this much money, you will say, no, get lost. I will not give you my piece of land. But probably you cannot make the same argument when a different structure is trying to encroach upon it. Then you realize that half the problem is about money, is about acquisitions. The other part is about legalities changing philosophically because there are other changes happening in the philosophical premise. Is it very difficult to understand? Can you understand now? I know it will be difficult. At least you have to spend some few months understanding this whole concept together. Every day you have to understand about this. I personally see the launch of GNU, which is something I was mentioning about when we were talking about Richard Stallman, as a particularly poignant moment of difference. Lyotard's Differond is in 1983, and Richard Matthew Stallman's GNU Unix compiler is also in 1983. I somehow would like to believe that at a meta level, these two are connected. Of course, these two are not connected in the sense of having contact with each other, but there's some kind of a philosophical connections that's happening around the same time. Uh, in the digital medium, old laws cannot resolve new problems because the problems are philosophically of a different category and nature. If older laws were still to be used to solve the problems of the newer origin, then the resolution would be as flawed as the charges of criminality in the first place. Since the problem is so different, in Wikipedia, can you say, I have written a line anonymously and Devashish has written a line anonymously? In the end, can I say that since my line got modified, it's okay because it's up openly in the WYSIWYG editor space. So probably Devashish thought that my line needs modification and Devashish modified my line. If Devashish modifies my line, can I go around saying Devashish stole my line in a Wikipedia kind of writing? Can I say Devashish stole my line? Is it a possibility to say the other person? Correct. It might be true that somebody copied my line, took it off, and then, in fact, erased it from a wiki page. But I still cannot say that Devashish or say Bijumoni or whoever has stolen my line from Wikipedia. Because we are agreeing to write in some different legal, philosophical platform where we know that my writing can remain, my writing can be copied, my writing cannot remain, my writing can go away. Because the philosophy is so different, the legality has to be restructured and re-understood. In the digital information society, the commons agreements are extended and expanded as codes. And codes, I think most of you understand what codes are. We have also, in a small way, discussed this in class before. The resultant action of codifying property rights introduces doubts and difficulties that are expected to be formalized in any legislative capacity. That is primarily because for an ever moving text, the shift from status 1 to status n is rampant, is accepted, is commonplace. We already enter the claim to intellectual property neither remains on the object of the property nor on the makers of such objects. It's easier for people to understand when we say that the claim no longer remains on the object. But it becomes immediately a matter of palpitation, panic, and concern when we start saying that it does not even remain on the makers of such objects. Then we start asking questions that Devashish asked a while back. What happens to authors who have written a certain piece or who have composed a certain music? How will they get paid? Then such concerns come into place. But one has to understand whether legally the act of copyright was placed on the object or on the maker of the object. Since for a long time before digital medium, the two seemed to be almost equal and used interchangeably, we understood copyright in a certain manner. In the new age, in digital infinite collaborative writing, the object and the maker are philosophically so far removed from each other that we don't know copying or removing or modifying, even if it is a problem at which end. whether it is a problem at the level of the object or whether it is a problem at the level of the maker of the object. Which brings us to the next question. What are we trying to write? Which is the property that we are trying to write? Or whether the rights should exist on the owner or whether the rights should exist on the object in an owner agnostic manner. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Because today's class might sound slightly philosophical, which is why I asked the last day, have you all read Foucault and Derrida? Because then you will understand that this is one of the later critical theories which comes after that. The point is that whether the necessity for digital commons even emerged and whether it dates back a long way when the first arguments were raised as to whether in a software writing codes deserve a specific kind of authorship or not. This is very important. Just give me a minute. So if you're writing a poem, we understand that at the end, the resultant poem is an intellectual property and whoever has written the poem. Therefore, the poet is the owner of that poem and therefore some rights, particularly related to the materials, particularly related to money, those kinds of rights will exist on the poet. What happens in the level of coding? Is coding not writing? Or are coders not writers?
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. But what happens? In most cases, coding is almost always commissioned. People write codes only because some company, some organization, some employer, some boss has asked them to write codes. Since independent coding almost does not exist outside the parameters of hacking, for many years, coding has not been recognized as any kind of intellectual property. So one interesting way of looking at hackers are as independent coders. People who write effectively for the computer to understand, but do not write under a certain kind of a commission. In this thesis, the kind that I'm trying to talk about, in this entire idea, I also find it interesting to note how disparate things happen along the same time. For instance, which year is Foucault's What is an Author? Anybody knows? Anybody knows which year is Foucault's What is an Author? Which year was it published? Sorry, some other faculty member was giving a class at the other end and both of us were shouting on top of our voices. Nobody could hear anything. Yeah, so I was asking, anybody remembers which year is Foucault's What is an Author?
Ma'am, 1969.
Correct, absolutely. So I want you to also take note of many things which are happening together at the same time. For instance, the Indian Antitrust or Competition Law, which is also known as the MRTP, I will mention it here. Sorry, did it go on mute? Did you hear my last line? So Foucault's What is an Author is 1969. Also in 1969 is the Indian Antitrust or Competition Law, which is known as the Monopolistic and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, or the MRTP Act, something that I already mentioned in your chat. This was also in 1969. So as a methodology, maybe we can understand if analogy studies can be implemented in studying digital humanities. These problems will begin, these problems will happen, and this will begin to stimulate us to ask questions such as, whether we need to look at certain years, first locate certain years, and then try and see what different kinds of things are happening around the world along same years, along same time period, and to see why a certain tendency is emerging. Does it not fascinate any of you? It fascinates me in many ways. When I think that in 1969, that far of Foucault is writing an essay called "What is an Author?" Along the same time in India, we have the MRTP Act. In 1983, which is many years later, at the same time in which some software scientist is having weird philosophical ideas about changing the world of software and codes, which eventually will make an impact about digital writing, including for people in the humanities, such as what we are doing right now. And also in 1983, in the level of critical theory, Lyotard will talk about difference, which exactly talks about similar problems which are supposed to have been addressed at the level of software. But what Lyotard talks about in 1983 does not remain limited to software. It also tries and raises the whole question above and beyond legal philosophical premises. It takes us to a whole new level. And okay, I will not mention too many details. I'm also trying to. We will now move into a certain kind of authorship which I'm interested in discussing with all of you. And that, of course, is an important characteristic of writing in which the power of networked economy of cultural production is ongoing. We did discuss it in one of the previous classes in which we decided that if there was in print, if there was one author, even if there were more than one authors, at the time in which your entire intellectual property goes to the press, we understand that this work is finite, is limited. This work in itself will not be able to change. So suddenly one day, magically, one line in your book will not change. It will remain exactly how it has gone to the press and how it got printed and how it came out of the press. But since we know that that is not the case with digital writing, and in digital writing it can anyway change only if we have access to backends, and it makes it all the more easier if the backends are open source, because then anybody can have access to the backends. Also, quick revision here: what are such applications called, in which the backend is exactly how you see it in the front end? What are these editors called? Nobody remembers? WYSIWYG editors. WYSIWYG editors are the ones in which the backend and the front end are same. So if you have access to the front end, it means you already have access to the backend and vice versa. But in print, because power is unidirectional, power moves from content producer to content consumer. In digital editors, which encourages us to write digitally and create born digital texts, thanks to WYSIWYG and such kinds of editors, the flow of power has now become moving in a spiral or a cycle, as you call it. It is not unidirectional anymore, because now everybody can read, everybody can write, and everybody can again read, everybody can again write. This brings us to an interesting position. Foucault talks about the function of an author. In What is an Author, all of you remember that Foucault talks about how authorship is not merely is not merely about the person who's writing or composing or creating. It's more about the function. Author is not a person, author is a function. All of you remember these bits when you were doing What is an Author by Foucault? The primary argument that comes up from What is an Author is the fact that the author is a function. The author is not a person. And in this case, we now see in digital collaborative infinite writing that the reader is also a function. It could be traced from Rolla Barthes' Death of an Author and Birth of a Reader, but it does not specifically exist even during the time of Barthes, that even reader is a function. Because we understand readers are real human beings, in which readers will read whatever content is in front of them. But now, since every reader can also contribute and participate and modify and edit some content which has been written by an earlier writer, so therefore the reader is also seemingly becoming a function. Now, quick question. In digital collaborative infinite writing, should the function of author be finite or infinite? What does your logic say? Debashish is on mute. I can see him answering, but I can't hear.
I'm a little bit confused, ma'am.
It should be infinite because anybody across the world can write, and now anybody across the world can read because it is time agnostic, it is person agnostic, it is even access agnostic. Everybody has similar rights because it has been written in the WYSIWYG editor. So now we can say that in digital collaborative infinite writing and for born digital texts, the function of the author is infinite as much as the function of the reader is also infinite, which therefore means what? Therefore, combine if it was one equation which said that the function of the author is infinite, and if there was another equation which said that the function of the reader is infinite, combining we would come to this interesting position that in digital infinite collaborative writing, function of the author is equal to the function of the reader. True or not? If the function of the author was infinite and if the function of the reader was infinite too, then combining the last two equations, is it not true to assume that the function of the author is also equal to the function of the reader?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that bring us to some kind of what we refer to as an infinite loop?
Yes, ma'am.
That's exactly my argument as well. Since this is provisionally a case in which every reader is a writer and every writer is a further reader, and that reader is again a contributor, we reach a complete case of infinity in which everybody is everything. And that is because we are no longer talking about everybody's, we are not talking about functions. So every human being functionally can be a writer or a reader in digital collaborative writing. Also, more than human beings, it is also possible that a bot is created who writes on its own. Have you seen bots who write and create contents on their own? There are many Twitter bots. For instance, if you have access to Twitter, you can go and search digital humanities bots. There are many bots of robots, bots, you understand? There are many robots of digital humanities, which will by itself search any content that is available on DH and will start aggregating contents. So if you follow that bot instead of some human being, as much as the human being might have helped you in understanding about seminars, conferences, or new books written about DH, the bot will do the same thing. We do not even require a human being to sit in one place and do this accumulating, aggregating work anymore. Bots in DH have become that interesting. You access Twitter? This class accesses Twitter?
Yes, ma'am. Not much, but
Start practicing using Twitter. Twitter is a wonderful social media to reach out to other parts of the world. When you are doing DH, I think I mentioned this earlier. The most important thing does not remain understanding the world at your doorstep. The more important thing, I think, in my opinion, is to reach your doorstep to the other parts of the world. A lot has happened in ensuring that the world comes at our doorstep. But very little has happened in India in which we take ourselves out to the world. Which is why even today when we talk about DH, we talk about the United States, we talk about UK, we talk about King's College London, we talk about MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab. Even after so many years, we do not really talk about a center for digital humanities from India. It's happening in small bits and small parts, and it's partially happening because Indians are more concerned about understanding what the world has to say about DH and not really doing much about what we need to show the world that this is what we did about DH. So follow Twitter. Twitter is an amazing way of understanding what the world is doing and reaching out to the world, because now it isn't about intentions. Nobody can say, Tejpur University, they might not be doing it that well, don't follow it. It's not on anybody. These have been created and given responsibilities to different bots. They will aggregate and accumulate every related thing about digital humanities, provided you have the correct hashtags. I think it's a very nice way of reaching out to the world, telling the world that you're also beginning to do digital humanities. Now, I have, in my understanding, I have created this idiom called the Oroboros snake model of authorship. But before that, does anybody know of the Oroboros snake? What is the Oroboros snake? Has anybody heard about the Oroboros snake? It's an idiom. I have created this idiom, so all responsibility for this idiom is mine. Anybody knows about the Oroboros snake? Oroboros snake exists in the mythical traditions. Some people say it was Egyptian mythical tradition. Some people say it's in Scandinavian alchemic traditions. But the Oroboros snake is that snake which goes in a whirl. It goes round and round, and it eats up its own tail. The head of the snake eats up its own tail. It exists in popular media. It also exists in a very popular computer game. Very popular computer game. Can anybody think of a popular representation of the Ouroboros in computer games?
Snake Zenzia.
Snake Zenzia. Snake Zenzia is one of the most important and popular digital game adaptations of the Ouroboros snake, which is the same game. You have to ensure that the snake does not eat up its own tail, but eventually, at some point of time or not, the snake will. There is no escape. So, how much more you can keep making your snake grow before it eats its own tail is the challenge of the game. But there will be some point in which the snake will eventually eat up, and then you lose the game at that point. You understand from how many points you've got. But my understanding of this idea of digital collaborative authorship, which exists in every kind of open source, open access, WYSIWYG editing platforms, is to see that it's to say that this model exists on how the Oroboros snake works, which is why I called it the Oroboros snake model of authorship. So my argument is that it is a smooth whirl which is meant to happen as an effect without any sense of threat, because it has itself agreed to eat itself up. It is not a case of a quarrel. It is not of a case of a dialectic. It is not of a case of contradiction. In an Oroboros snake, nobody goes and slaps the snake and says, "Why did you eat my tail?" It could be possible to quarrel with the snake if it was eating up somebody else's tail. But since the Oroboros snake eats its own tail, it does it by consent. And nobody can strike a conversation or a dialectic or a contradiction with the snake saying you ate up some part of my existence. It is a smooth world. There is no sense of threat in this eating up. Do you understand what I'm saying and how I'm trying to relate it to digital writing? Because in our digital writing, we have agreed that anonymously anybody can write and anybody can modify or delete or edit my writing. We will not take offense if somebody deletes or moderates or edits the line that I have written earlier. We enter this kind of so supposing there's a line written in Wikipedia which has been written by me, and Devashish comes and modifies or edits that line. Will I feel offended? One, will I feel offended? Two, if I feel offended, who will I feel offended from, or who will I feel offended about? Because in many cases I don't even know the person. We're all writing anonymously. We have chosen to write in a certain platform, understanding fully well the nuances of that platform. That is the beauty of digital texts and digital writing, which exists in born digital narratives. The birth of the next is by choice, not death of the former. It is a unique amalgamation of little bits that is infinitely forming and choosing to get deformed and to get formed yet again. Digital collaborative infinite writing is this Oroboros snake, which is constantly put to a loop where it can revolve constantly, infinitely, with the provisional hope that at some moment it will break, it will change, and it will take a new turn. That does not mean I will stop contributing to it. If my line gets modified, if my contribution gets edited, I will not feel offended or feel that my intellectual property has gone haywire. Churi, churi, churi. I will not go around saying that. I already understand and accept that I am writing in a different philosophical and legal premise. I cannot talk about the other kinds of problems which I would mention earlier. This is a different parameter, this is a different set of rules. And I'm willingly participating in the set of rules, agreeing that at some point of time, what I'm writing will not exist anymore. Or what I'm writing will be added with more writing. It will get modified. Something new will happen. We know it and we still contribute. Why do we contribute? Because we believe that at some point of time, more than limiting access from this person, limiting ideas to that person, limiting language to this person, limiting money to that person, at some point, above all different parameters of limiting, It is important to feel yourself a part of the universal who is loved and accepted for what you are. You will write no matter who you are. If your teacher said that you do not write well, does not mean you can never write in Wikipedia. You can still write. If your father said, I never want to see you writing another poem again, you can still write. We are working in different parameters. I want to talk to you about the hope of universalism. I want to talk to you about the love of universality. I want to talk to you about how beautiful the new legal parameters can be if we chose to anonymously keep writing, clearly understanding that if somebody is modifying our writing, if somebody is deleting our writing, editing our writing, there is no grudge towards the person or the function. There is no problem. We have agreed to be a part of this. We have agreed to be a set of universal writers in which one person from Chile will write something, one person from Venezuela will edit it and modify it, another person from India will again contribute it, add, modify, delete, somebody else from the UK will do it. It will go on and on and on. And it is important to understand that philosophical idea of humanities writing has changed because software and technology has changed. If open source would not have happened, this whole thing would not have happened. So it's important to understand the correlations before starting to do digital humanities and before trying to insert your hands into doing real-time projects. It's important to understand why there are so many levels in understanding digital humanities. Why one says that it's important to learn up programming. Why one says it's important to learn up a bit about markup languages. That's because one small thing which has happened in the technology sphere will make a huge difference to a sphere in legality. And that change in the sphere of legality will again make a huge change in the way in which writing exists for the humanities. So digital humanities is not about one person doing the digital and one person doing the humanities. It's about how everybody can come together and everybody can talk about different interdisciplinary parameters, which we will learn ourselves, we will do it ourselves, we will implement it ourselves, and thus we will keep on moving in an infinite loop. We will not fetch a programmer from the computer science department and a poet from the English and Assamese department and say, you write a poem and you digitize it. We will try and see how we can do it ourselves. Because unless we do it ourselves, we won't understand what problems we are facing. We were also discussing about, that the problem with the word biche, remember, in one of the earlier classes? So in order to address our problems, we have to make our own tools. And by creating our own tools in order to suit whatever humanities studies or scholarship we are doing, we are entering into the real aspect of digital humanities. So if authorship was indeed something to be protected and protected in such a way that authorization to access would delimit readership by numbers or other man-made parameters of eligibilities, then any content produced in the alternative or collaborative or infinite or digital network is actually, in my opinion, a fresh start by the basic fact that such accesses cannot be outlawed easily anymore now. Because we also have alternative laws and licenses to save us from entering into legal debates. Authorial rights have become more flexible. They begin to operate as functions of effects, as contrasted to how we earlier saw it as functions of processes. And when authorship in itself and authoring in large seems to fall into an infinite loop, one can understand by the tendencies of ongoing processes that it can never be concluded for certain because the work itself, at least provisionally, never reaches any point of conclusion. And the fact that any writing, any born digital infinite collaborative writing, will not reach any point of conclusion does not only exist in philosophy, it also exists in the structure. It is not like saying keep writing, one day you will do it. It actually structurally shows you how there is no end to a Wikipedia page. Supposing there was a page called Hinduism, which was in Wikipedia. Can there be any moment, any time in history when we say, this is the final project? After this, nothing can be added to this page in Wikipedia. We cannot say that. That, I think, is the beauty. So I will take a pause now because last 10 minutes I usually welcome people to talk. In the unit 1 of the paper of the course which you have as digital humanities, in the paper Introduction to Digital Humanities, you had defining digital humanities, which got roughly done because, it will keep on and on. One can never say that till this much is important for knowing digital humanities. It's never true. The point is to celebrate that infinity. But even in that, we have tried to address defining digital humanities, history of digital humanities, nature, concept, and scope of digital humanities, need and importance of digital humanities, and one general summary of the idea of infinity and the beauty of digital humanities, which in my opinion should encourage you to go to the next unit. Your unit 2 is interesting. There are two aspects to unit 2. They talk about theories and debates in DH and challenges and future of DH. So basically, they're very closely related, basically 2 units. Before that, have you all, even in an aggregate, understood unit 1 of this paper? From my end, unit 1 is over. Yes, questions, comments? Have you all even roughly understood the unit 1?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, a very basic question. Did you like understanding digital humanities?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I like.
Yes.
That is the best part. It does not depend on whether you liked my teaching, but if you have understood and gained any interest in DH as a subject, my work is made. Yes, okay, so over to Dr. Neog if you want to organize some formal question answer session or what have you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mitra, for this wonderful session. I, on behalf of Department of Assamese, want to convey my heartfelt thanks to you for make this online lecture a successful event. Anyway, I want to request my students to give your comment on this lecture series.
Mhm.
Start from Devasis. Okay. We want to know your experience.
Good morning, respected speaker of this lecture series, Dr. Koel Mitra ma'am, and our respected HOD Neuk sir. When I'm going to comment, when I look back to the start of this lecture series, there were nothing much I knew about DH. From that aspect, one can predict that it must have been an introductory kind of lecture or classes which dealt with all the technical terms, theories, definitions, etc. Yes, certainly it compelled to be like that, but the way ma'am had taught us was indulging and definitely engaging. She did not only teach us the terms and definitions, but the interactions we had, the chit chats have made us to learn the philosophies and the debates behind the course as well. As the name itself says, ma'am's classes were the perfect blending of digital and humanities. So I want to thank uh, ma'am and our HOD sir, uh, and definitely looking forward to learn more from ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Devashish.
Thank you, Devasis. Thank you so much. And Arukarbra Hunim, comment. Pransi, Nisamoni, Noyon.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Respected HOD sir and Koel Mitra ma'am. First of all, I must say that I did not have any idea about what is digital humanities prior to this program. Therefore, from these 5 classes, I got to know a lot of new things. Koel Mitra ma'am explained everything, became easy to understand. Her way of explaining the most complex topics in the simplest possible manner, using small examples, small and interesting examples, was brilliant, which helped us understand the ideas easily and also made us enjoy the classroom experience. Thank you, Koel Mitra ma'am. Also, thank you to HOD sir for giving us Chasen program. I am looking forward to have the support and blessings of ma'am in future. Thank you.
Oh, certainly, certainly. Don't talk about blessings, just talk about participation. In the digital world, everybody is equal. There's no hierarchy that somebody will bless and you will get blessed. Perhaps we are talking and writing anonymously a same project and we will work as partners. Collaborator and participants are more important words to use in the idea. Don't talk about blessings. Ma'am is nobody to bless, and probably blessings don't even exist. But
Okay,
yes,
ma'am.
love and equality does.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next, Nishamoni.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ma'am. First of all, digital is a very new thing for everyone in the class present here. Though we all are related with this in our everyday life, but we didn't have much knowledge about digital humanities. But after having your classes, it seemed to be a very familiar subject, very familiar topic to us because you taught us with such examples that we can relate with, and it was easy for us to understand the concept. And you taught us very systematically. First, you taught us about what does digital humanities mean. Then you discussed about the history and the nature and scope. Then the needs and importance. So I thank you, ma'am, for this. And I want to say that it was the first phase of the course. These were the first classes of the course that we got in fourth semester. So I think no one would be better than you for introducing this topic. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you, sir. That's all I want to say today.
Thank you. Thank you, Nishamuni. There are major stalwarts working in digital humanities. We are not even there. But please, for heaven's sake, understand that one beautiful thing about digital humanities is that there is no hierarchy. Anybody can be better than me, anybody can be worse than me. In this academic parlance, we are not talking of hierarchies. We are all together at the same place. But I get your point. Thank you. Thank you, Nishamuni.
Next, আৰু কোনে ক'বা? নয়ন.
Good morning, everyone, respected ma'am and respected sir. First of all, I would like to thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable lecture. And before your classes, I did not have any idea about digital humanities, and I would like to express my gratitude to, as this class was a complete new experience apart from our traditional classes. We we will learn a lot of things for you, ma'am, and we know that the theories and the practicality for practicality. And ma'am, you I personally want to further study this subject, and it's a very useful and very helpful session for us. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Nayan. I have also written my email in the chat box. If anybody has any further questions or want to ask anything related, just feel free and write an email. I will certainly answer. Even if not within a day, in the next 2-3 days, I will certainly give an answer to your email. Any questions?
আৰু কোনোবাই ক'বা? Comment? Jodi Nai, then I would like to request Dr. Mitra to deliver your valedictory remark.
Oh, just fall in love with digital humanities. Please understand that more than hierarchies, more than verticals, the world is gradually moving towards horizontals. Philosophically, legally, even in your academic parlance, please understand the beauty of the horizontal more than the beauty of the vertical. And the moment we all start understanding and respecting and loving everybody, even in the horizontal, the love for vertical will automatically get included. But more than, if it's a sir and if it's a madam, you are respectful. But with each other, you are bullying each other and you are not being as nice. That's not nice. And the digital humanities teaches us to give importance to the horizontal more than the vertical.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra. Thank you for delivering a very good lectures, great lectures, and your lectures enriched. And I trust in future we will get enough support and cooperation in our DS journey.
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Okay, and I trust you will come to our campus for offline class. I hope you will give your consent very soon.
Yes, I will.
It will be very good if I have you in our own campus. With these notes, I again, with my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to you, and best wishes to all my students. Thank you so much.
Thank you all of you. Thank you, Dr. Neil. Thank you to everybody in the class.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. সকলোকে থেংক ইউ কৈছো থেংক ইউ তোমালোক আছা সকলো ঠিক আছে
আছো স্যার
লাষ্ট এটা এনাউন্সমেন্ট আমাৰ কালিলে তোমালোকে গম পাইছা যে আমাৰ নিউজ লেটাৰখন উন্মোচন হ'ব নিউজ লেটাৰখন উন্মোচন হওঁতেই কেমিকেল সায়েন্স ডিপাৰ্টমেন্টৰ আমাৰ ৰমেশ ডেকা ছাৰে এটা বক্তৃতা প্ৰদান কৰিব 3:30 পৰা হ'ব আৰু আমাৰ ভিসি ছাৰ উপস্থিত থাকিব গতিকে তোমালোকে কাইলে অকমান সোনকালে আহিবা 3:30 ষ্টাৰ্ট হ'ব গতিকে প্ৰগ্ৰামটো হ'ব আৰু কাইলেৰ পৰা সকলোৰে সাকে কোৱাৰেন্টাইন শেষ হৈছে কাইলেৰ পৰা আমি অফলাইন ক্লাছ ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰিম সেইখিনি কথা তোমালোকক অৱগত কৰিলো কাইলে অকমান সোনকালে আহিবা ভালকে আহিবা গোটেইখিনি আমি এৰেঞ্জ কৰিম আৰু তোমালোকৰ গান গোৱা যদি আছে দুটা গান আমি কাইলে দুটা গীত আমি ৰাখিম কাৰ্যসূচীটোত গতিকে সকলোৰে উপস্থিতি কামনা কৰিলো আৰু সকলোকে পুনৰ আমি অফলাইন ক্লাছত কাইলেৰ পৰা পাম সেইখিনি কৈছো আৰু মই আশা কৰিছো তোমালোকে ডিজিটেল হিউমেনিটিজৰ এই লেকচাৰ সিৰিজটো এনজয় কৰিছা গোটেইখিনি বুজি পাইছা আৰু প্ৰথম লেকচাৰটো এই পাঁচটা লেকচাৰৰ তোমালোকে সিনপসিস মানে কি শিকিলা মানে প্ৰত্যেকটো লেকচাৰৰ সেইখিনি তোমালোকক মই কলোই কি তাৰিখে জমা দিবা তোমালোকে ফেব্ৰুৱাৰীৰ 18 তাৰিখৰ ভিতৰত তোমালোকৰ এই ৰিপৰ্টটো জমা দিবা আৰু সেইটো 20 মাৰ্কছৰ হ'ব ফাৰ্স্ট সেশনেল আকৌ এবাৰ এনাউন্স কৰিলো আৰু কিছুমান ভিডিঅ তোমালোকক দিম মই দুই এটা ক্লাছ মাজে মাজে কৰি থাকিম এইখিনি কথা কৈছো আৰু তোমালোকৰ সেকেন্ড ইউনিটটো থাৰ্ড ইউনিটটো আৰু ফৰ্থ ইউনিটটোৰ কাৰণে ফেব্ৰুৱাৰী 20 তাৰিখ মানৰ পৰা এজন নতুন ফেকাল্টিয়ে জয়েন কৰিব এমটেক কম্পিউটাৰ সায়েন্সৰ পাৰ্টখিনি তোমালোকক চাব বিশেষকৈ ফৰ্থ ইউনিটৰ এটা প্ৰজেক্ট আছে সেই প্ৰজেক্টটোৰ ওপৰত তেওঁ শিকাব আৰু ডিজিটেল হিউমেনিটিজৰ থিওৰিটিকেল এস্পেক্টবোৰৰ ওপৰত আলোচনা কৰিবলৈ যদি কোয়েল মিত্ৰাই সময় দিয়ে তেতিয়াহলে মাৰ্চৰ শেষ বা এপ্ৰিলত তেওঁক আমি আকৌ সপ্তাহমানৰ কাৰণে কেম্পাছলৈ মাতিম বুলি ভাবিছো এইখিনি কথা কৈছো আৰু তাৰপিছত তোমালোকে আৰু এটা বস্তু মই ক'বলৈ থাকি গ'ল তোমালোকক যদি অলপ ষ্টাডি মেটেৰিয়েল তেওঁ প্ৰভাইড কৰে মই সুধি চাম তেতিয়াহলে তোমালোকৰ আৰু সুবিধা হ'ব আৰু কিতাপ পত্ৰ তোমালোকে ল'বা ডিজিটেল হিউমেনিটিজৰ কিতাপৰ এটা মই দিছিলো হেৰি আৰু মোৰ ওচৰতে এখন কিতাপ আছে তোমালোকে খুব বেছিক কিতাপ এখন আছে সেইখনো তোমালোকে অলপ জেৰক্স কৰি ল'ব পাৰিবা কাইলৈ লৈ ল'ব মোৰ পৰা এইদৰে তোমালোকে এই কোৰ্সটো আগবঢ়োৱা কিবা যদি অসুবিধা পোৱা তেতিয়াহলে তেওঁ ইমেইল এড্ৰেছ দিছে আৰু ফোন নাম্বাৰটো দেৱাশিসৰ হাতত আছে বা মোৰ ওচৰতো আছে তোমালোকে লৈ কন্টেক্ট কৰিব পাৰিবা তেওঁটো গম পাইছাই ভেৰি এপ্ৰোচেবল কোনো ধৰণৰ প্ৰবলেম নাপায় গতিকে কিবা হেৰি থাকিলে তেওঁক সুধি ল'বা এইখিনি কথা তোমালোকক ক'লো আৰু তোমালোকে ইমান ভালদৰে ক্লাছখিনি কৰাৰ কাৰণে আৰু তেওঁ মানে এই গোটেই সেশনটো ভাল কৰাৰ কাৰণে সুন্দৰ হৈ উঠাৰ কাৰণে তোমালোকক পুনৰবাৰ মোৰ ফালৰ পৰা ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছো থেংক ইউ